Firstly, let me explain a few things about Wonder Boy. We have the original arcades game released way back in 1986 by Sega, and we have other versions where it is known as Adventure Island, but theoretically the same game. I will discuss that when we get to it. We also have games which won't be here in this ranking, such as Wonder Boy and Monsterland, or Super Wonder Boy and Monsterland, as these are all sequels which went down an RPG route with Wonder Boy. We also have various different sequels to the original game, such as Wonder Boy IV, all of them being very different. We are strictly looking at the 1986 arcade classic that most kids and adults had a copy of back in the 80s. A simple game of reaching the end of the stage before the timer runs out and collecting fruit, which increases the timer. There are 4 rounds in each world in Wonder Boy. At the end of the last stage, an ogre awaits. After defeating it, we then go back to stage 1 to 4 again, which are pretty much the same as before, but with increased difficulty and more baddies to defeat. A game I played in the arcade as a kid and played relentlessly on my C64 back in the day. So from worst to best, here is the various home ports of Wonder Boy ranked as requested by many people here. All I am going to say that Wonder Boy isn't wandering anywhere too quickly in this shoddy Amstrad CPC conversion by Activision, which released back in 1987. Something I praise the Amstrad with a lot is the ability to produce contrasty colours, very bright colours in other words. Now you might have thought that given the source material is a fairly bright game, that Amstrad could pull this off, but no, this version has very dull colours and looks kind of depressing. The game is frankly boring to play with its terrible frame rate. Even when I hopped onto skateboards to pick up some speed, I hoped it would. No, it didn't, and I actually thought that what was the point in adding a skateboard if Wonder Boy travels at the same pace? 8-bit chip music sounds average and also includes sound effects, but there are times when extra music should have been added. For example, when smashing an egg for the invincibility fairy, no music here for that. And going back to the poor frame rates, sprites flicker really badly too with this port. Although this Japanese 1986 conversion direct from Sega came out a year prior to the Amstrad conversion, this is leap years ahead. Yes, the layout of the stages are a little strange to what you're normally used to, and instead of confronting the ogre at the end of say round 4, we fight him at the end of round 1. The game actually looks vibrant, and it even has a unique tune for the background music, which is actually pretty damn catchy if I'm honest. The Sega SG-1000 version is choppy as you can see, but this version is at least playable and didn't feel depressing whilst playing it. Control wise it's very good too. It's not perfect by any means, but like I say, a huge leap from the trashy previous Amstrad CPC conversion. Okay, so Wonder Boy looks like he has eaten too many burgers in the Spectrum's version, but it is faithful to the arcade original given its hardware capabilities, and to some degree it's fairly playable. Again, is it perfect? Well, not really, but by far it is better than the Amstrad CPC's conversion, and although a little bit choppy, it's much more playable for sure. Nice Spectrum music with this game, and the sound effects are good too, and good responsive controls. Not a bad port at all for the ZX Spectrum. Just like another version in this video, this MSX conversion goes by the name of Adventure Island. As you will hear in the background, the music is directly from the arcades game, which actually sounds pretty good for the MSX. The only difference is with this version is the change of character, as I will explain why this is a little later. Considering many MSX conversions can be often placed much lower down in my videos, I think this does a fairly decent job considering. Okay, so scrolling isn't perfect, but if you have seen some of my other videos to see how bad MSX handles scrolling in in some games, you will see why this is actually a pretty good version. Sprite control is really responsive and its use of colour palette is really nice here too. Of course we have sprites here with backgrounds being exposed through their bodies, but not necessarily a big deal breaker. It's a really good port to play. I recommend this one. Despite the name of this game being Adventure Island, this NES game is pretty much Wonderboy. I won't go into licensing issues, but briefly, Sega owns the name Wonderboy and the character, and so the NES version had to change its name, and that's why the sprite or the character that we control looks different here compared with the other versions. But yes, the game is Wonderboy through and through. So is it any good? Yes, absolutely perfect. The music is different from the arcade game, but again, likely this was down to legalities, and of course Sega clung to its icons back in those days too. The scrolling is fast, no frame rate issues at all. Adventure Island has very tight controls, and frankly, it was a really joyful port of Wonderboy to play. Difficulty wise, this is up there. Each port generally messes around with enemy sprites and where fruit is placed in the game. This version is no exception. Totally decent port and cannot rank it any further because we are actually hunting for the next best thing to the arcade original. If it wasn't for the sprite changes and music change, this would have likely ranked in top spot. Easily by comparing all of the 8-bit home computer versions of Wonderboy, the Commodore 64 version beats them in terms of colour, music, sound effects, scrolling and collision detection. This really is the perfect 8-bit computer port. This is the version I had as a kid. I specifically had it on the Hit Squad label. I have fond memories of playing this more often than my other C64 games. I actually broke my joystick one Saturday morning whilst playing stage 2 on this. I yanked my joystick and snapped it. Needless to say, I wasn't a happy boy at all that Saturday morning, and to be fair, it was some cheater joystick anyways. My dad went out to get me a new one that day, otherwise mum and dad likely wouldn't have heard the end of it. Anyways, no bias here, I try and assess everything I cover per port, but I am pretty confident most will agree with me on this choice. If you had a Sega Game Gear back in the day and you wanted to annoy somebody with the Game Gear versus Game Boy scenario, this was a game to do it with for sure. This is the best of the best and likely the closest to the arcade game you will get. The game looks wonderful here, as well as music and the sound effects. I always thought that the cover art was a little sinister for the Game Gear version though, very strange stuff. And in first place, I am ranking the Sega Master System conversion, which released back in 1987. Virtually the same version as the Sega Game Gear's port. What makes this better than the Game Gear port then? Well, what can I say? The Sega Master System hooked up to a TV and that's about it. The game plays just as well, sounds awesome with its near arcade sounding music and sound effects. It's a cheerful and very colourful conversion with amazing scrolling screens which flow fairly well. There is a slight bit of frame rate delay every now and again, but nothing significant. But that is a consequence of home computer and console conversions back in the day. Not everything was 100% to perfection like it would be in today's world. I never owned this version back in the day on my Sega Master System, but know for a fact I would likely prefer this over the really cool Commodore 64 port. Truly a great attempt to bring in Wonderboy into the homes at the time of its release. And that's it for today's ranking Wonderboy ports. This one's been requested over and over again, and I thought I would release it just before Christmas, so at least you can see one of your favourite games being compared. So let me know in the comments which your favourite version of Wonderboy was, and please, before you comment, just be mindful that this is a very confusing history of Wonderboy. It's not as simple as something like Streets of Rage. It's been called various different names over the years, it's got various different sequels, and yeah, it's very confusing. But anyways, until next time, thanks for watching.